My name is Danielle osei-mensah, and I am 31 years old. I am going to tell you about the night I walked into a restaurant on the corner of Halsted and Fullerton in Chicago, Illinois, ordered a glass of water I never touched, and watched the two people I had trusted most in my life sit across from each other like they had been sitting that way for a long time. It was a Thursday in late October, specifically October 19th. I know the date because I had been supposed to be in Cincinnati that weekend for a deposition preparation meeting that I had rescheduled twice already, and I had told my supervising attorney at Meridian Group that I needed one more day in Chicago before I could commit to traveling. I told her it was a personal obligation. I did not tell her what kind. The restaurant was called Forza. It was not the kind of place either of them would have chosen on their own. It was the kind of place you choose when you want to be seen together without being seen. Low lighting, corner booths, the kind of menu where nothing is written plainly. I had been tipped off by a mutual connection. 2 words in a text message. Nothing more. I will tell you who sent it later. What I can tell you now is that I sat at the bar for 11 minutes before I saw them. Camille Achiampong was wearing the earrings I had given her for her birthday. The small gold ones shaped like half moons. She had texted me a photograph of herself in them the morning she received them, and used 3 exclamation points. That was 4 months before October 19th. Marcus Webb was sitting across from her with his jacket on the back of the chair the way he always did. Right sleeve hooked over the corner, which I used to find endearing. He was laughing at something. She was leaning forward. I sat at the bar and I did not go over to the table. I ordered the water. I watched for 6 more minutes. Then I put $40 on the bar, walked out onto Halsted, and stood on the sidewalk with my hands loose at my sides and the October air very cold against my face. My phone was in my jacket pocket. I did not take it out. I walked 2 blocks north and then stopped in front of a dry cleaner that had already closed for the night, and I looked at my reflection in the dark glass for a while. I was trying to understand what my face looked like from the outside. I had been with Marcus Webb for 4 years and 3 months. We had an apartment together in Wicker Park. I had met Camille Achiampong at a corporate litigation seminar in the spring of 2019, and in 3 years and 1 month she had become the person I told everything to. The person I called when the work was hard. The person who had a key to my apartment. I did not cry on the sidewalk. There was something happening in my chest, but it was not grief yet. It was closer to the sensation you get when you step off a curb you did not see, and your stomach drops before your foot hits the ground. Not pain. Displacement. The sudden awareness that the floor is not where you thought it was. I walked back to my car, a 2021 Honda Accord in graphite gray, parked on Willow 2 blocks east. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The streetlight above the car was flickering, on and off in a 4-second pattern that I counted for a while without meaning to. My phone buzzed. Not Marcus. Not Camille, a number I did not recognize. A 404 area code. Atlanta. I did not know anyone in Atlanta. I looked at it for 3 full rings. Before I tell you who was on the other end of that call, if you are still here, thank you. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already, because this story is going to go places I did not expect it to go when I was living it. Drop your location and your local time in the comments right now. I want to know where you are listening from. Genuinely. There is something about knowing that people in different time zones are sitting with this at the same moment that matters to me. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house on the 7200 block of South Clyde Avenue in Chicago's South Shore neighborhood. Red brick, like everything else on that street. A front porch with 2 iron railings, one of which had been bent slightly outward since before I was born and never repaired. My mother used to say it gave the house character. My father used to say it gave him a project he never got around to. The house had a finished basement my father had carpeted in 1994 in a shade of brown that does not exist in any current paint catalog. It had a kitchen with white laminate cabinets and a window above the sink that faced the neighbor's fence so closely that we never really got natural light in there. It had 1 bathroom for 5 people, which operated as a diplomatic crisis every school morning from 1998 through 2014. I was the 3rd of 4 children. My father is Gerald osei-mensah, 63, a retired facilities manager for the Chicago Transit Authority. He worked the same route for 22 years. He is a man who measures his worth in what he provides, and in our family, the word providing was used so often it lost its texture. Gerald provides. That is his identity, his language, his entire operating system. My mother is Abena Osei-mensah, 61, a registered nurse who worked rotating shifts at Advocate Trinity Hospital for 30 years and is now 3 years into a semi-retirement she did not entirely choose. She is the executive branch of the family. Gerald made the money. Abena decided what it meant. My oldest sibling is Ernest Osei-mensah, 37, an operations director at a freight logistics company in Naperville. Ernest is the finished product in the family's understanding of what success looks like. He bought a house in Orland Park at 29. He has 2 children, Kofi and Amma, who are 8 and 6. He has a wife named Patricia who hosts Thanksgiving and speaks in complete, structured sentences. Ernest does not have to explain himself at family gatherings. That is the thing I noticed first as a child and could not name until much later. He is never in the position of explaining. My second oldest sibling is Vivian Osei-mensah, 35, a dental hygienist in Evanston. Vivian is quiet in the way that people are quiet when they have decided that engagement is not worth the energy. She calls our mother twice a week, shows up to things, and has successfully made herself invisible by being present and saying very little. I used to think this was conflict avoidance. I understand now that it was something else. My youngest sibling is Jerome Osei-mensah, 27, who is completing a master's in public health at DePaul. Jerome is still in what the family calls his season, which is a word they use to mean he has not yet achieved the things that would allow them to stop worrying about him. Jerome is not behind. He is just not finished in the way that Ernest is finished, and so the family holds him in a kind of tender suspension that is its own form of pressure. And then me, Danielle, the one who left Illinois for law school, came back, built something specific and careful, and somehow still could not manage to be the right kind of daughter. At the time of October 19th, I was a third-year associate at Meridian Group, a mid-sized commercial litigation firm in the Loop. I had a specific role. I handled discovery management on large corporate disputes, which meant I was responsible for coordinating document review teams, managing production timelines, and liaising with expert witnesses. It was not glamorous work. It was precise work. There is a difference. I had graduated from Northwestern Pritzker School of Law in May 2019. I passed the Illinois bar on the first attempt. My first 2 years at Meridian were considered strong enough that by spring of the prior year I had been assigned to Harkin Voss Versa Consolidated Freight Solutions, a case involving $47 million in disputed freight contracts, as second chair on a team of 4. My supervising attorney was Patricia Amedro, 44, who had told me in my last review that she was positioning me for a senior associate recommendation in 14 months if the Harkin Voss work went the way she expected. 14 months. I had that number written on a sticky note on the inside of my desk drawer at Meridian. I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park. Apartment 3C, 1640 North Dammon, 460 square feet, which is enough if you keep it orderly, and I keep it orderly. I was paying $1,720 a month. I had been there for 2 years and 1 month. It was the first place I had lived entirely alone, without a roommate or a boyfriend, and I had not fully understood until I moved in what quiet sounds like when it belongs to you. Marcus Webb had not moved in. We had talked about it. I had not said yes and had not entirely understood why. Some part of me had been holding something in reserve. My daily routine at that period was structured and quiet. Up at 5:45, run 2 miles on the lake path if the weather was above 32 degrees, at the office by 8:15, out by 7:30 most evenings. Home, a meal I made from scratch 3 nights a week, take out the other 4. Documents open on the table after dinner most nights until 10. I was building something that required consistency the way a structure requires a foundation. Not decoration, not speed, but steadiness, laid carefully over time. Parents had contributed $1,400 to my law school expenses in the fall of 2017. It came from a savings account my father had maintained for a long time, a sum that had been assembled over many years in the way that people who do not have excess money assemble things, slowly, without fanfare, with the specific quiet pride of deferred sacrifice. I was grateful for that money, In the specific way you are grateful when someone gives you something real. But the money began appearing in conversation approximately 8 months after it was given, and had not stopped appearing since. The phrase my father used with a consistency I could set a clock to was, "We did not do all of this so you could." It appeared at holidays. It appeared at dinners. It appeared in phone calls that started about other things. "We did not do all of this so you could stay in that little apartment alone. We did not do all of this so you could miss Christmas for a work deadline. We did not do all of this so you could put that job before your family." In 4 years and 3 months of hearing that sentence begin, I had never once heard what the end of it was actually supposed to be. What was I supposed to have done instead? I do not think my father knew either. The sentence was not an argument. It was a weather pattern. At holiday gatherings, the script ran reliably. We would arrive at the house on South Clyde. My mother would have made something that required most of the previous day to prepare, and at some point during the meal, someone would make a comment that was shaped like a joke, but was not a joke. Ernest would say, something like, "Danny's probably billing us for sitting here," and the table would laugh, and I would smile because smiling is the smallest possible response. My mother would say something like, "I just want to know when you are going to let that job be somebody else's problem for one weekend," and look at me in the way that made the whole table a witness to the question. Father would wait until the end of the meal, when we were carrying dishes to the kitchen, to say the thing that was actually on his mind. He always waited until we were alone. He would say something like, "I hear you are very busy these days," in a tone that made busy sound like a character defect. And I would say, "It is a big case, Dad." And he would nod slowly in the way that meant he had heard me and had decided not to believe me. The pattern had a shape I could recognize by the time I was 25. It went like this. Danielle had something she was building. The family needed something from Danielle. The family presented the need as a fact rather than a request. Danielle declined or modified the request. The family interpreted the decline as evidence of a character problem. The $1,400 appeared in the conversation. The silence afterward lasted 2 to 3 weeks. Then the next occasion came around, and everyone performed normalcy, and the cycle restarted. I had adapted to it in the specific ways that people adapt to things they do not yet believe they can change. I attended things I could not afford to attend, in terms of time. I shortened phone calls I needed to shorten and felt guilty about shortening them. I nodded along at dinners when my mother made comments about my choices. I absorbed the comparisons to Ernest without letting anything show on my face. There was a particular comparison that appeared more often than the others. Ernest had been home for every major occasion since he moved to Orland Park, a commute of 43 minutes on 94 South. I lived on the other side of the city, 31 minutes by the Blue Line. The fact that my attendance record was not substantially different from Ernest's was not part of the conversation. Ernest commuted. I had priorities. When I missed my cousin Nana's baby shower in the spring of my second year at Meridian because I was in the middle of a document production deadline, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening and spoke for 17 minutes without asking me a single question. At the end of the call, she said, "I just think you need to ask yourself what your family means to you," and then said she had to start dinner. I sat on the kitchen floor after that call, with my palms flat on the tile, which is cold even in April, and I stayed there for a while. It was not devastation. It was something flatter. It was the specific sensation of being held responsible for a version of yourself that you do not recognize and cannot argue with, because the argument would require you to prove a negative, not resentment. Just the particular exhaustion of being perpetually measured against a standard that had never been explained to me in plain language. In the weeks before October 19th, the pattern had narrowed into something that felt less like weather and more like walls closing. My parents had been talking about the following spring, March or April, when my father's sister, Auntie Celia, who lived in a senior living facility in Gary, Indiana, would need someone to coordinate her care transition. She was 78 and had been managing independently but could not much longer. She had 2 adult children who lived in Memphis and Oakland. She was Gerald's older sister, and my father loved her with the specific quiet ferocity of someone who does not say it often. The conversation had not been a conversation. My mother had told me on a Sunday phone call that the family had figured out a plan, and that the plan involved me. Not Ernest, who was closer in geography, me, because As my mother explained with a calm that did not invite discussion, I did not have a husband and I did not have children, and my schedule was therefore more flexible. She said the phrase "more flexible" in a tone that suggested she was describing a simple logistical fact, the way you would describe a container that had more available space. I had said I would need to think about it. She had said, "What is there to think about?" "Danny, she's family." And I had said, "I understand that, Mom." And I had swallowed the rest of it. That was 3 Sundays before October 19th. The call had lasted 8 minutes. When I hung up, I noticed that my right hand was still pressed flat against the kitchen counter, like I had been steadying myself against something. That moment was not the shock. The shock came later, October 7th, a Saturday. I arrived at the house on South Clyde at 1:47 in the afternoon. I had brought a chicken and groundnut stew that I had started at 9 that morning. I had made it from dried whole tomatoes and fresh peppers and 2 pounds of chicken thighs I had deboned by hand. It had taken 3 hours and 40 minutes from prep to finish. I had packed it in a sealed glass container inside a canvas bag with a folded dish towel underneath it to keep it level in the car. This matters because making that stew on a Saturday morning is a specific act of presence. It is not a grocery run. It is time given. When I arrived, Ernest and Patricia were already there. Their SUV was in the driveway, a gray Chevrolet Traverse, which meant they had been there long enough to get the good parking spot. Jerome was sitting on the back porch with his earbuds in. Vivienne was in the kitchen with my mother. I set the stew on the counter. My mother looked at it and said, "Oh, good. You can leave it for tomorrow," and turned back to the cutting board. I went out to the back porch. I said hello to Jerome, and he pulled one earbud out and said, "Hey, they've been in there for a while," and put the earbud back in. At 2:20, my father called everyone to the dining room. This was unusual. We did not usually convene formally on Saturday afternoons. That should have told me something. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother sat at the corner to his right. Ernest sat beside her. Patricia was beside Ernest. Vivienne had come from the kitchen. Jerome had come from the porch. I sat across from Ernest. The chairs were all occupied before I sat down. That specific arrangement, the waiting, is something I turned over later. Someone had coordinated the seating without saying so. There was small talk. Ernest asked Jerome about his thesis. My mother asked Patricia about the kids. My father ate 3 crackers and said nothing for 4 minutes, which was how I knew he was building up to something. Then my mother cleared her throat. She glanced at Ernest before she spoke. He moved his water glass 2 inches to the left. Patricia looked at the centerpiece. These movements were small and quick and not accidental. My mother said, "Your father and I have been talking about Auntie Celia. We have all been talking, and we have decided that the best situation, the one that makes the most sense for the family, is for Danny to take a leave of absence from her firm beginning in March, move into Celia's apartment in Gary for 6 months, and coordinate her transition to full-time care." She said it the way you read a resolution at a board meeting. Subject, action, timeline. She looked at me after she said it, not to ask, to confirm. Her expression was the expression of someone presenting a solution that has already been approved. I looked at Ernest. He was looking at the table. I looked at Vivienne. She was looking at my mother. I looked at Jerome. He was looking at me. He was the only one. My father said, "It is only 6 months, Danny. And we did not do all of this so that you could not show up when your family needs you." Nobody said maybe we should ask her first. Not Patricia, who was a practical woman and had seen enough of these situations to know what they looked like. Not Vivienne, who had opinions she swallowed. Not Jerome, who was looking at me from across the table with an expression I could not fully read, but which contained, I think, an apology he did not know how to deliver. The room was quiet, except for the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen. I sat with my hands flat on the tablecloth for a moment. Then I folded my napkin carefully and set it beside my plate. I picked up my bag from the back of the chair. I stood up. I did not say anything. There was no goodbye and no explanation and no performance of composure. I walked through the kitchen, past the stew I had spent 3 hours and 40 minutes making on a Saturday morning, and out through the back door. My mother said Danielle once, in a voice that was more surprised than commanding. I did not turn around. I drove north on Stony Island with the radio off, both hands on the wheel at 9 and 3, which is not how I normally drive. My breathing was something I was paying attention to in a deliberate way, the way you pay attention to your breathing when you are trying not to pay attention to anything else. The lake was visible for a stretch on Lakeshore Drive. It was dark gray in the October afternoon. I looked at it for the 3 seconds I could look at it before the road required me back. I parked in the garage on North Damen at 3:12 in the afternoon. Inside the apartment, I locked the door behind me, took off my jacket, set my bag on the hook by the door, went to the kitchen sink and stood there for a moment with the water running, not doing anything with it, just standing. Then I turned it off. I went to the couch and sat with my back against the left armrest, both feet flat on the cushion, knees up. Palms on my knees. I stared at the opposite wall for a while. The print on the wall above my television is a Ghanaian kente pattern in blue and gold that I found at a market on Devon Avenue in 2021. I had looked at it so many times it was like a piece of furniture. I looked at it now and it was just fabric and dye. The phone started buzzing before I had been sitting for 5 minutes. First text, from my mother. You embarrassed your father in his own home. I hope you know that. 3 minutes later. Nobody is asking you to give up your life. We are asking you to be a daughter. Then the pivot. 4 minutes after that. I know you are going through something. I know the thing with Marcus has you upset. That is why we are all worried about you. I stared at that one for a while. The thing with Marcus was not something I had told my mother about. The fact that she knew the thing with Marcus and was using it as a reframing device in the same text thread as the guilt, not as genuine concern, was something I felt in my back teeth. Missed calls. My father. Twice, back-to-back at 3:48 and 3:51. My mother, once at 4:02. Ernest at 4:15. Ernest never calls, he texts. The fact that he called and left a voicemail I did not listen to was information in itself. Vivienne did not call. Vivienne did not text. The silence from Vivienne was its own specific texture. She had sat at that table and said nothing. And now she was saying nothing again. But Vivienne's silence is not passive. I know Vivienne. Her silence is considered. Jerome texted at 4:30. One line. For what it's worth, I didn't know it was going to go like that. I did not respond to any of it. At 9:47, I turned the phone off. It was an hour and 13 minutes before midnight, on the day my parents had sat in a room and assigned me a life without asking me if it was mine to give. Sleep came faster than I expected. The kind of sleep that arrives when the body has been holding a weight for hours, and the decision to set it down, even temporarily, releases something. It was not restful sleep. It was the sleep of someone who had just stepped off a long flight into an unfamiliar airport, and the customs line had not yet begun. Tomorrow was going to require something I was not certain I had yet. I was certain I was going to find out either way. I was awake at 6:03 the following Sunday morning. Made coffee. Was sitting at the kitchen table with a deposition transcript I needed to review when the knock came at 8:41. I live on the 3rd floor. There is a buzzer system. No one had buzzed up. Someone had followed a resident through the exterior door. I went to the peephole first. The woman standing in the hallway was white, mid-50s, wearing a navy blazer over dark slacks. She had a lanyard around her neck. She was not holding anything. I opened the door on the chain. She said, "Good morning. I'm looking for Danielle Osei-mensah. My name is Karen Szymanski. I'm a licensed clinical social worker with Cook County Adult Protective Services." I removed the chain. She said she had received a welfare referral the previous evening. She said she was following up as a standard intake procedure. She said the referral had characterized me as, and she used the word precisely, experiencing a mental health crisis following a recent relationship disruption. She said it had also characterized my living situation as concerning. She said she could not identify the caller. She asked if she could come in. I stepped back and let her through. She stood in my living room and I watched her take it in. The apartment was clean. The transcript pages were fanned in order on the table. The bookshelves were organized. The kitchen was visible from where she stood and the dishes were dry in the rack. There were no dishes in the sink. There was a legal pad with structured notes on it open beside my coffee. There was nothing in that room that looked like crisis. There was only a woman in her pajamas on a Sunday morning doing her work. Karen Szymanski looked around for several seconds without speaking. Then she said, "I can see this is clearly a functional household." She asked me a few questions. How was I sleeping? Did I have people in my life I could speak to? Was I currently under any professional care? I answered all of them plainly. I was sleeping adequately. I had a physician and a therapist I saw quarterly. I was not in crisis. I was a third-year associate at a commercial litigation firm, and I had a deposition transcript on the kitchen table. Before she left, she said she was required to tell me something procedurally. She said that filing a false welfare report with the county was a misdemeanor under Illinois law. That if an investigation determined the referral had been made in bad faith, the caller could face a fine of up to $500 and, in repeat cases, more significant consequences. She said she was telling me this not because she suspected anything, but because people who received reports like this one sometimes found the information useful. She said she could not confirm. Who made the call? I already knew. There was only one person who knew both the specific details of my private relationship and had the specific motivation to use a county welfare line as a pressure instrument. The same night that I had walked out of that dining room, my mother is not a cruel woman. She is a woman who believes the goal justifies the method. She believes that if she could get me back to that table, the means of getting me there would become irrelevant because the outcome was right. That is not cruelty. It is a very specific kind of certainty that has never been challenged by anyone who mattered to her. I closed the door behind Karen Szymanski and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then, I went back to the kitchen, table. Something in me that had been loose and unresolved for about 20 hours went still. Not anger. Not the hot pressing thing that anger is. Something the exact opposite of that. Something like the moment a photograph comes into focus when you have been adjusting the lens for a long time. Clarity. That is the only word for it. I became very clear about what I was going to do next. I did what I do best. I am a litigation associate whose specific skill is managing complexity by reducing it to documented fact. I opened my legal pad to a fresh page, and I did what I do with every case that feels larger than its individual parts. I mapped it. The ask was 6 months, 26 weeks, approximately 182 days. If I took a leave of absence from Meridian during this period, I would lose the continuity on Harkin Voss, which was entering its most complex phase, pre-trial briefing and expert witness preparation. Patricia Amedro had built the second chair assignment around my presence. A leave of absence would not pause the case. It would require them to rebuild the team, which would be registered not as my absence, but as my unreliability. The senior associate recommendation in 14 months was contingent on the Harkin Voss outcome. 6 months away from the table at this specific stage was not a pause in my timeline. It was a deletion of it. In raw numbers, my billing rate was $215 per hour as an associate. A 6-month leave represented approximately 1,020 billable hours, which at full realization was $219,300 in work product I would not be producing for the firm. I was not a partner. That number was not my income, but it was my contribution to a firm that was evaluating whether I was worth the senior associate investment. The math was not abstract. There was also the matter of the Gary apartment. Auntie Celia's building had a parking garage. I would need to sublet my Wicker Park apartment, which required 90 days' notice and my landlord's approval, which was not guaranteed for a sublet arrangement. If the sublet failed, I would be paying $1,620 per month for an apartment I was not living in, while also managing a situation in Gary, Indiana that nobody had put a budget number on. I turned to a fresh sheet, not of things I was willing to sacrifice, of things I refused to lose. The Harkin Voss second chair position and the 14-month timeline attached to it. My apartment on North Damen, which I had earned through 3 years of deliberate and specific work. My ability to make decisions about my own body and its location without routing them through a family vote. My license to practice law in the state of Illinois, which required me to meet continuing education hours I could not complete while managing a full-time caregiving situation in another city. 4 lines. Simple. Non-negotiable. In 2021, I had said yes to something I should not have said yes to. My mother had asked me to handle the administrative management of Jerome's financial aid appeal when he was entering DePaul. Jerome was capable of doing this himself, and the case was not complicated. But she had asked me, and I had said yes because it was easier than the conversation about why I should not be the one doing it. And I had spent 43 hours over 6 weeks of billable time managing a process that was not mine to manage. During my mid-year review that year, a partner named Douglas Hale had looked at my productivity numbers and said quietly, "Danielle, your work is excellent when it is present. Make sure it's present." I did not explain what had taken 43 hours away from it. I just said I understood and would not let it happen again. I had promised myself then, not out loud, just in the particular internal language you use when you make a commitment to yourself that you intend to keep. Never again would I give my professional future away in pieces because someone framed the taking as family. And now they were not asking me to give 43 hours. They were asking for 6 months, and they were not asking. I turned my phone back on at 7:15 Monday morning, 47 new messages, not including voicemails. The pattern from Saturday night had evolved. The pleas had matured into a coordinated campaign with distinct lanes. My father texted twice. Both messages were short and used no punctuation. "Call your mother," and "We need to talk, Danny." My father's texts are always like this, terse and under-punctuated, like he is sending dispatches from a place with a limited signal. His manipulation style is silence and disappointment delivered in the quietest possible register. He does not argue. He withdraws warmth and waits. The absence of his warmth is supposed to function like a barometric drop. You can feel the weather changing. My mother had sent 9 messages over the course of Sunday. They formed an arc. The first 3 were emotional. She had not slept. She was worried. She did not understand what she had done to deserve this treatment. The middle 3 pivoted to the 14,200. "We gave what we gave because you were our child and we believed in you. I just hope you can understand what that cost us." The final 3 were instructions. She had spoken to her sister. She had told her sister that Danielle would call by Wednesday. She expected me to honor that commitment, a commitment I had never made. She had simply announced it and made it real by saying it. Ernest sent a longer message. It was measured and reasonable sounding, and it was the most sophisticated form of pressure because it was framed as brotherly concern. He said he understood the situation was hard. He said he knew the timing was not ideal. He said that when he had moved to Orland Park, he had made sacrifices too, and that family sometimes requires adjustment of priorities. He did not mention that his adjustments had never been framed as mandatory without his consent. He used the word together 3 times, as in, "We figured this out together," and that word was doing a great deal of load-bearing work it was not entitled to. Vivian had still sent nothing. I took 1 call. Ernest at 8:30, because some habits die hard. I had been conditioned for 31 years to believe that Ernest calling meant something required my attention. I picked it up and listened for 4 minutes while he laid out a version of events in which the Saturday gathering had been a family conversation, and my leaving had been an overreaction to a suggestion. Then he said the words that ended the call for me. "At some point, Danny, you have to ask yourself what you're willing to do for this family." It was not a question. It was an instruction with a question mark taped to the end of it. I said, "I hear you, Ernest." That was my complete response. He waited for more. I said nothing. He said okay in a tone that meant it was not okay. We ended the call. Not one of the 47 messages mentioned Karen Szymanski. Not one message mentioned the welfare referral. Not one person asked whether I was all right in the context of a county social worker having arrived at my door on a Sunday morning. They did not mention it because mentioning it would require acknowledging it had happened. And acknowledging it had happened would require them to either defend it or condemn it. And neither of those options served the campaign. The concern was never genuine. That was the sentence I said out loud to my empty apartment. Not to anyone, just to hear it outside of my head. I opened the legal pad. Below the 4 non-negotiables from the night before I wrote, 1 more line. "I will not trade my dignity for the comfort of people who believe my compliance is love." On Wednesday of that same week, Patricia Amedro called me at 4:30 in the afternoon. She said the opposing counsel in Harkin Voss had filed a motion challenging the admissibility of our key expert witness testimony. She said she needed me to draft the opposition brief response. She also said something else. She said she had been in conversation with the managing partner about the composition of trial team, and that she was recommending me for a named second chair designation in the trial proceedings, which would be reflected in my personnel file and in my compensation structure. She said the designation came with a $22,000 annual increase effective at the start of trial preparation. She said the trial date was calendared for March 14th of the following year. She said she needed to know, today, whether I could commit fully to the Harkin-Voss team through verdict, which was estimated at 6 to 9 months from trial commencement. I said yes. I said it without a pause. I said it, and I meant every syllable of it. She said, "I went to bat for you in that room, Danielle. I want you to know that." She said it plainly, without ceremony, the way someone tells you the truth when they do not need anything from you in return. After the call, I opened my calendar. Trial commencement was March 14th. 9 months from verdict gave a possible endpoint of December. That was a 14-month window of non-negotiable professional presence. Beginning at exactly the moment my family had announced I would be in Gary, Indiana trial date, March 14th. Today, October 11th, 154. Days until trial. I sat with that number for a moment. Then I opened my draft folder and started pulling exhibits. This was real. This was mine, and nobody was going to take it from me. I called my Aunt Josephine on a Thursday evening, 10 days after the Saturday gathering. Josephine Osei, 67, retired secondary school administrator, lives in a small townhouse in Oak Park she has owned since 1991. She is my father's youngest sister, which makes her Auntie Celia's sister-in-law not blood, but family in the way that family is constructed, rather than inherited. The family has a word for Josephine, said not cruelly, but consistently. They call her difficult, cold. She keeps her distance from gatherings and does not explain herself, and that absence has been interpreted over 30 years as a personality defect rather than a considered choice. I had grown up understanding Josephine as someone who had problems getting along with people, which is a useful explanation if you do not ask the next question, which is getting along with which people and about what. I had not called Josephine since a birthday call 2 years before. I had her number still. I dialed it on the third ring of my own internal argument about whether to call. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything. The Saturday gathering, the announcement, the leave of absence, the welfare referral, the pressure campaign, the professional stakes. I did not summarize it. I told her the way you tell someone the whole thing when you have been holding it alone and your arms have started to give out. Josephine listened without a word. I talked for 11 minutes. When I stopped, she went quiet. I could hear something in the background. A television on low volume, maybe one room away, muffled by a wall or a closed door. She was in her house. She was in a chair somewhere. And she was quiet for long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she spoke, and her voice had something old and heavy underneath it. Not sad. Old. The specific weight that comes from a story you have been carrying for a very long time. She said, "Danielle, in 1999 I was 39 years old. I was head of the Academic Resources Department at Thornridge High School in Dolton. I had been in that position for 4 years. I had applied for the assistant principal role and my principal had told me she intended to recommend me." She paused. "Your grandmother was ill. Different illness, same family. Your father and Auntie Celia and my other brother Robert sat at a table and decided that I was the one who could do it, because I was not married and I did not have children. They used the word flexible, that same exact word." She was quiet for a moment. "I stayed for 3 years and 4 months. I left the position at Thornridge. By the time I was available to come back, the role had been filled twice and the principal had retired. I was 43. I started over." Another pause. Nobody thanked me. Nobody even noticed. I was just expected. Like furniture, she said it simply, not bitterly, with the even tone of a person who has processed something past the point of performance. Then she said, "I will be at wherever you need me to be. You tell me when and where." I said, "It might be ugly, Josephine." She said, "I should have done this for myself a long time ago. Let me do it now." What she said that I carried with me into the room, later. They called me difficult for saying no to something no one had the right to demand. That means difficult is the right word for people like us. I'll wear it. My cousin Adwoa Danso Asante, 29, who worked at a dental practice in Hyde Park and had grown up close enough to our family to know where the bodies were buried, sent me a text on a Saturday morning 12 days after the gathering. The text said, "She's talking to everyone," I replied. Okay, that was the complete exchange. Through a second channel, a mutual friend named Tasha, who had been close to my mother's social circle since the late 1990s, I learned the specifics over the following 2 days. My mother had called 7 relatives in the week following the Saturday gathering. The calls followed a consistent script. The narrative she had constructed was this: Danielle was going through something. She had not been herself since the situation with her boyfriend. She was withdrawn, reactive, struggling to manage the pressure of her job. The family was worried. The family needed to be patient with her. She used the word fragile, that specific word, in every call, to every relative she reached. I named what this was in plain language, to myself, in my kitchen. My mother was pre-framing me. She had built a box I could not climb out of, or so she thought. The logic of the box was elegant in a cold way. If I arrived at any family confrontation and was calm, I was performing, which confirmed the fragility narrative. If I was emotional, I was proving it. If I was assertive, I was reactive. If I was quiet, I was withdrawn. Every possible response I could give had been pre-categorized as evidence of the condition she had described. There was no version of me that could walk into a room full of people who had received that script and exist outside of the frame she had built. Or so she thought. The second antagonist was Ernest. Ernest had sent a private message to 4 relatives, specifically my mother's 2 sisters, my father's cousin, and Patricia's own mother, a woman named Loretta, who had known our family since before I was born. The message suggested that Danielle had made a scene at a private family gathering, had left without resolution, and had since refused to engage in conversation. He did not use the word scene, but he did not need to. The framing did the work. I read Ernest's forwarded message 3 times. I identified the specific misrepresentation. There had been no scene. There had been silence. I had folded a napkin and walked out of a room without speaking. That silence had been reframed as disruption, because disruption was easier to work with than dignity. I did not panic. I took out the legal pad. I had 3 facts already. I had a woman from Cook County who had arrived at my door. I had a trial date. I had Patricia Amedro's voice on a phone call saying, "I went to bat for you." I had Josephine Osei in Oak Park, 67 years old, carrying 30 years of unfinished business and finally willing to set it down in a room. I prepared. 2 nights before the confrontation. A Tuesday, 10:17 in the evening. I sat at the kitchen table with a single sheet of lined paper torn from the back of my legal pad, and a blue ballpoint pen, and a cup of tea that had gone cold while I sat thinking about whether I was going to write what I was about to write. This was not a speech. I was not going to stand in front of my family and deliver remarks. I was going to say 3 things, 3 facts, not interpretations, not emotional arguments, not the history of being the wrong kind of daughter. Facts, the kind that 15 people in a room cannot argue with because they are documented and observable. Fact 1. I had received a call from Patricia Amedro on October 11th, 4 days after the Saturday gathering. The call had offered me a named second chair designation in trial proceedings beginning March 14th, with a compensation increase of $22,000. This was not a theoretical opportunity. It was a scheduled legal proceeding with a case number, a judge, and a courtroom. Fact 2. On October 8th at 8:41 in the morning, a Cook County Adult Protective Services social worker named Karen Szymanski had arrived at my apartment at 1640 North Dahmen, apartment 3C, in response to a welfare referral filed the previous evening. The referral had described me as experiencing a mental health crisis. Karen Szymanski had assessed the situation and documented the apartment as a functional household. She had also informed me that filing a false welfare report with the county is a misdemeanor under Illinois law. Fact 3. No one in the family had asked me whether I was willing. Not before the gathering, not during the announcement, not in 47 messages over the following week. There had been no question. There had been an assignment. Those are different things, and the difference matters. I read them back. 1, 2, 3. Plain sentences. No embellishments. I set the pen down. Then I picked up my phone and called Josephine. She answered immediately. I said, 2 days. Are you still coming? She said, I'll be there before you. The night before the confrontation, the apartment was clean in the way it gets when your hands need to do something physical, so your mind does not have to do it alone. I had wiped down the counters. I had reorganized the bookshelf by height, which is something I only do when I am trying to impose order on something I cannot actually control. The paper with the 3 facts was on the kitchen table, face down. My phone was face down beside it. My laptop was open, but the document on the screen was not the one I was supposed to be reviewing. I had opened it and had not read a word. I was afraid. Not of the room. I knew the room. I had been in that room my whole life. I was afraid of Abena osei-mensah specifically, because I knew she would be watching my face for the moment I softened, the moment the daughter in me overtook the person I had become. And I was afraid that if I saw her face at the right angle in the right light, she would find it. She had always found it. I was afraid that I would look at her, and something in me would want to fix the distance between us so badly that I would begin to negotiate, which is how every previous attempt at clarity had ended, in a negotiation I had not intended to enter, in which I gave up the thing I had come to protect. I was afraid of Gerald osei-mensah because I knew that his silence in that room would be directed at me like a beam. And I was afraid that I would mistake his disappointment for the final word on whether I was a good daughter, which is exactly the confusion he had never bothered to correct. I was afraid of Ernest because he was the smartest tactician in the family, and he would find the moment when the room was closest to tipping back toward my mother, and he would use exactly the right word to tip it, and I was afraid I would lose my footing when he did. I picked up my phone. Went back to Adwoa's message. She's talking to everyone. I read it twice. Then I thought about Ernest's message to the 4 relatives. The specific word fragile, delivered in advance to every person who would be sitting in that room. The box. Then I thought about Josephine. Not the conversation. The specific years. 3 years and 4 months. The roles she did not get back. The person who had never been thanked, who had been filed under difficult and set aside. She had carried that for more than 2 decades, and tomorrow she was going to walk into a room and put it down. And she was going to do it partly for me, and partly for the woman she had been at 39, who had not had anyone with her. Nobody taught her she was allowed to say no. Nobody taught me either. But I was learning now, and I was learning in time. I picked up the pen. Below the 3 facts, I wrote 1 more line. 6 words. I am not available for assignment. I was not going to say it in the room. It was not for the room. It was for the jacket pocket. It was for the moments when I felt the old pull, the trained reflex of smoothing things over, and needed something to press my hand against. I folded the paper. Put it in the pocket of the jacket hanging on the chair. Set my alarm for 7 mo, turned off the light. My hands, in the dark, were finally still. Before I tell you what happened in that room, I need to stop for just a moment. What I am about to describe was the hardest thing I have ever done. Not because I was afraid of the people sitting at that table. I had known those people my entire life. I knew exactly how they would sit. I knew how my mother holds her coffee cup when she is performing calm. I knew the particular way Ernest adjusts his glasses when he is about to redirect a conversation. I was afraid of myself. Afraid that when I stood in that room, all of the years of being trained to smooth it over would kick in, and I would start to negotiate before I had finished the sentence. If you have ever sat in a room full of people who made a decision about your life without asking you, drop it in the comments. I want to know, because I do not think I am the only one who has been in that room. Now let me tell you what happened. The confrontation took place on a Saturday, October 28th. I arrived at the house on South Clyde at 1:52 in the afternoon. The air was the specific cold of late Chicago October, 39 degrees with a wind that found the gap at the collar. I had parked across the street this time, not in the driveway. I sat in the car for exactly 3 minutes, not to compose myself, to observe. There were 4 cars in front of the house and 2 in the driveway. My mother's Buick, Ernest's Traverse, a silver Toyota that belonged to my mother's sister Aunt Vida, a white Honda that I recognized as belonging to my cousin Nana, a car I did not recognize at the curb, and Josephine's old green Subaru, parked ahead of everyone else near the corner, which meant she had arrived early and had been waiting. I got out of the car. I crossed the street. Through the front window, I could see bodies in the dining room. Vida, Nana, someone else whose silhouette I did not immediately place. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key. I had a key. I rang the bell because I was not walking in as a daughter who lived there. I was walking in as someone who had something to say. My mother opened the door. She was wearing her good blouse, the burgundy one, which she wears when occasion requires it. Her face arranged itself into a welcome that was aimed slightly past my shoulder, toward the room behind me. Toward the witnesses inside, she said, "Danny, come in. Everyone is here." With a brightness I recognized as performance. I noticed that her body was angled sideways in the doorway, framing me in the opening for the room to see. She was staging the entrance. She was performing the warm welcome before I had taken one step inside, and the warmth of it was not for me. It was for the room's perception of the warmth. I named it to myself. She was performing for the room before I even sat down. Inside, my father at the head of the dining table, hands folded. Ernest and Patricia on the right side. Aunt Vida and Cousin Nana at the far end. Jerome in the doorway to the kitchen. Vivian in the living room adjacent near the window, sitting slightly apart from the main group. Josephine was in the corner of the living room near the bookshelf, seated in the chair that does not belong to the main conversation. She was wearing a gray sweater and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was watching the room the way a person watches a room when they have been in many rooms like it, and they know exactly how this one goes. When I entered, Josephine looked at me. She gave me nothing theatrical. Just a slight forward tilt of the chin, barely perceptible, the smallest acknowledgement between two people who have spoken the night before and know exactly what the day is for. My mother guided me to my seat as if she had placed it for me, which she had. It was at the corner of the table, not quite at the head, not quite in the center. A position that was neither commanding nor marginal. A position that had been designed to keep me slightly off axis. Small talk. Nana asking about my apartment. Vida asking my mother about a recipe. Children's voices from the back room. Kofi and Amma were there, which I had not fully accounted for, and which I noted as a human fact about this room, rather than a tactical one. Jerome handed me a cup of water I had not asked for. I held it. Then my mother set her coffee cup down. She looked at Ernest briefly. He moved his hand from the table to his lap. She said, "I thought it would be a good idea for us all to get together today to talk through the plan for Auntie Celia, since we left things a little unsettled last time." She looked at me. "Danielle has agreed to take on the coordination for Celia's care transition. We are thinking March, right, Danny?" She was looking directly at me. In front of Aunt Vida and Cousin Nana and her husband and Josephine in the corner and Jerome in the kitchen doorway. She was presenting my compliance as established fact and inviting me to confirm it in the presence of 9 witnesses. Set the cup of water down on the table. I stood up. My mother's expression shifted in the small way that expressions shift when someone does the unexpected thing. She had been waiting for a nod. Not a body standing up. I said, "Can I say something?" She said, "Of course," and relaxed slightly, because she heard it as agreement building to confirmation. I said, "I'm not going to yell, and I am not going to make a scene. But I need everyone in this room to hear 3 things, and I need everyone to hear all 3 before anyone responds." I kept my voice level. Not quiet. Level. The difference is important. Quiet sounds like suppression. Level sounds like someone who is not afraid of the silence that comes after a clear sentence. I said the first thing. On October 11th, 4 days after this family announced what I would be doing with the next 6 months of my life, I was offered a named second chair. Designation in a major commercial trial beginning March 14th. That is a documented professional. Opportunity with a case number and a courtroom and a $22,000 compensation increase. Nobody asked me before October 7th whether I had anything like that in my professional life. Nobody checked. The assumption was that whatever I had, it could be moved. Nana looked at the table. Aunt Vida's hand moved to her coffee cup and stayed there. Ernest's jaw shifted slightly to the right, a small adjustment I had seen him make when he was recalibrating. Patricia was very still. My mother said, "Danny, that is not what—" I raised my right hand. Not aggressive. Just present. Just clear. I held it for 2 seconds and then brought it down. I said, I need to get to the second thing. On October 8th at 8:41 in the morning, a Cook County Adult Protective Services social worker arrived at my apartment. Her name was Karen Shemansky. She had received a welfare referral the previous evening, the evening after I left this table, characterizing me as experiencing a mental health crisis. She told me before she left that filing a false welfare report with the county is a misdemeanor under Illinois law. The room changed its sound, not because anyone spoke, because 4 or 5 people in it simultaneously stopped breathing in the same way. My father's hands, which had been folded, unfolded, and lay flat on the table. Ernest looked at my mother. My mother's face did not change. That is when I knew she had no plan for this specific moment. She had built a box around a version of me that did not know how to name what had been done. This version of me had the receipts. Before anyone found words, Josephine stood up. She did not rush it. She came to standing slowly, with the deliberateness of someone who has been sitting in a chair for an hour and has been waiting for the exact right moment to rise from it. She said, I need to say something, and I should have said it a long time ago. The room looked at her. Josephine had been in the corner so quietly that I think some people in the room had not tracked her as a participant. Now she was standing, and she was small and 67 and in a gray sweater, and she was the most formidable person in that room by a significant margin. She said, In 1999, I was 39 years old, and I was being considered for an assistant principal position at Thornridge High School. I was 4 years into a department head role that I had built. The family needed someone to manage Gerald's mother's care transition. They sat down and decided it was me. Because I was not married, because I did not have children, because my schedule was flexible. She looked at my mother, not with heat, with the specific calm of someone reading from a document they have memorized. I stayed 3 years and 4 months. I gave up the position. By the time I came back to the work I had built, the door was closed. Nobody thanked me. Nobody even noticed. I was just expected. Like furniture. That is the word. Furniture. Something present and useful that you do not think to ask. She turned to me then. She said, Danielle, you are not furniture. You have never been furniture. And I should have been in this room saying that a long time ago. This is me saying it now. Nana looked at her mother. Vita was very quiet. Jerome had moved out of the kitchen doorway and was now inside the dining room leaning against the wall. I delivered the third thing. No one in this room asked me if I was willing. Not before October 7th. Not during the announcement. Not in 47 messages in the week that followed. There was no question. There was an assignment. Those are different things, and the difference is why we are all sitting here. The silence that followed was full. Then Ernest said, in a tone that was quieter than his usual register, we needed someone to take this on. Danielle, the truth is, we were looking at the cost of a professional care coordinator, and it was going to be between $3,400 and $4,800 a month. Patricia said, quietly to the table rather than to anyone. I told them they should have asked. She did not look up when she said it. She was looking at her hands. I looked at my father, Gerald Osei-Mensah, who had a sentence for every occasion, who had been deploying the same sentence about what they had not done all of this for across 31 years. He was sitting at the head of the table with his mouth slightly open and nothing coming out of it. This was the first time in my life I had seen that man without a sentence ready. I did not let it pass. I held it for a beat and named it to myself. He knows what just happened. He knows what was said and what was done, and he does not have a cover for it. Then I said to Ernest, clearly and without volume, I understand the cost was difficult. I am sorry that the situation with Celia is what it is. That is real, and I do not dismiss it. But the solution to a care coordination problem is not to elect a family member to the role without asking. And the solution is definitely not to file a welfare report when she declines. I let the room settle for a moment. Then I said what I had come to say. Here is what I am willing to do. Once a month on a Saturday, I will come to Gary with Auntie Celia for a scheduled visit. Scheduled in advance, at least 2 weeks out, unless there is a genuine medical emergency. Only if it does not conflict with an existing work commitment. I will do that. That is real. That is what I can give. I paused. Here is what I will not do. I will not take a leave of absence from my firm during an active trial proceeding. I will not sublet my apartment and move to Gary, Indiana for 6 months without my consent. I will not continue to have decisions about my professional life made in rooms I am not in. I will not treat the $14,200 my parents gave me in 2017 as a debt that never stops accruing. That money was a gift. I received it as one. I will not keep paying interest on it in years of my life. The room was very quiet. And if a welfare report is ever filed about me again by anyone in this family, I will pursue every legal avenue available to me. That is not a threat. That is a boundary. And I need everyone in this room to understand the difference. My mother said, "Are you threatening us?" I said, "No, I am telling you where the line is." For the first time in my memory, the room heard me and had nothing to say back. I did not leave immediately. I walked to the back room where Kofi and Amma were playing. Kofi was 8 and was building something out of interlocking blocks on the floor. Amma was 6 and was drawing in a notebook she held on her knee. I crouched down to their level. Amma looked up at me and said, "Auntie Danny, are you leaving?" I said, "In a minute, yeah." She said, "Is everyone okay?" It got really quiet. I said, "Grown-ups are working some things out. It's going to be okay." She nodded once, in the specific way that children nod when an adult gives them a clean, simple answer. Then she went back to her drawing. I sat with that for a second. The absolute straightforward acceptance of it. Here is a fact. Okay, moving on. I thought, when did we learn to take the clean answer and make it into something complicated? When did the clean answer stop being enough? I said goodbye to Aunt Vita briefly. I told her it was good to see her. She held my hand for a moment and did not say much. Then she said, "You look very much like yourself today," and I think she meant it as a specific observation rather than a general one. I said one thing to Ernest. I said, "I know you thought you were helping. I need you to trust me when I tell you that the way it was done was the problem, not the need." He looked at me with the expression of someone who has more to say and has made the decision not to say it. That was its own form of respect. I looked at my father for a moment before I left. He was still at the head of the table. He had not moved. I said, "I love you, Dad, and I need you to see me while you still can." I did not wait for an answer. Outside, Josephine was at the bottom of the porch steps. She had come out ahead of me. She was standing with her hands in the pockets of her coat looking at the street. When I came down the steps, she turned and put her arms around me. It was not a light hug. It was the kind that says I know exactly how much that cost, and I am not going to pretend it did not cost it. Steady and tight and completely still. The kind you give someone when words are inadequate instruments. Then she let go and held my arms briefly and looked at me. She said, "You held the line." 4 words. That was what she gave me. I said, "I'm shaking." She looked at me and said, "That's how you know it mattered." I got in the car. Windows down, even though it was 39 degrees. Radio off. I pulled out onto South Clyde and drove north. At some point, the lake came into view on the right, gray-blue and enormous. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I looked at it and felt like someone who had chosen to be in the car she was in, on the road she was on, going where she was going. The phone was very quiet the first week. The silence was designed to function as punishment. This was its intent and its architecture. The expectation was that I would feel the absence of their contact, and would eventually fill the silence by reaching toward them. I had done it before. I had done it many times. The silence had always worked on me because I had always been the one who could not bear to leave something unresolved. The silence that was designed to punish felt like the first real breath I had taken. Since October 7th, that is not poetry. That is a plain description of how it felt. My mother blocked me on Instagram. Ernest had not done anything directly, but had stopped responding to the thread we shared for Jerome's birthday planning. My father did not call, which was within the normal register of his communication, but felt different now because the absence had been chosen. Josephine called on the Monday evening following the confrontation. She talked for 8 minutes. She asked how I was doing and listened to the answer. She called again on Thursday, and again the following Monday. 3 calls in 10 days. each one short and warm and asking a direct question and listening to the response. She was establishing a rhythm. Adwa texted me on Sunday evening. 5 words. You did the right thing. I sent back a thumbs up. That was the complete exchange. On the Wednesday of the first week, Vivian called me. She called carefully. She did not start with what you did or are you okay. She started with a question. Can I tell you something I did not know? She said she had not known about the welfare referral until the confrontation. She had found out in the room. She said, that was wrong. What was done to you was wrong. It was not a full endorsement of everything that had happened. It was not an apology on anyone else's behalf. It was a crack in a wall, and Vivian did not produce cracks often, and I named it as what it was. I went back to work immediately. On the Monday after the confrontation, I submitted the first section of the Harkin Voss opposition brief to Patricia Amedro by 5 Ikes in the afternoon. It was on time. It was thorough. The professional continuity was real, and it mattered to me to make it real. Within 2 weeks, Ernest had quietly engaged a professional care coordination service for Auntie Celia. The rate was $3,800 per month. The family distributed the cost among 5 people, including themselves. It was not their first choice. It was not elegant, but it worked, and it worked without me. Around 3 weeks after the confrontation, Adwa forwarded me a message she had received from my mother. It was short. It said, Danielle thinks she can just do whatever she wants now. I read it once. Put the phone on the counter, did not respond. 10 days after that, Patricia sent me a message. It was 4 sentences. She said she had been in a situation once where her family had asked her to give up a position she had built, and she had not been able to say no, and she had spent years measuring what it had cost. She said she was not sure why she was telling me this. She said she was glad I was on the team. I sent back, thank you, for all of it. It was not warm and it was not cold. It was real. The most authoritative antagonist called on a Tuesday evening 6 weeks after the confrontation. My father called at 7:42 p.m. I almost did not pick it up. I stared at his name on the screen for 4 rings. Then I picked it up. Not guilt, not obligation, not the trained reflex of the good daughter. Something more stubborn and less explainable than either of those things. The specific unreasonable hope that the person calling was not entirely the person who had sat at that table with his hands folded. That somewhere in the man who had always measured his love in provisions, there was someone who had registered what had happened. I picked it up. In the background, there was a game on television. Basketball, I thought, though it was low enough that I could not be certain. He was sitting in the living room. He was calling me from the same chair he had been sitting in every evening for as long as I could remember. He said, I did not handle October right. He used the word handle. Not manage, not respond to. Handle. As if it were a logistical matter that had required better technique. He did not say sorry. He said, I know what your mother did with the county. I am not going to pretend I did not know after the fact. That was not right. He acknowledged it. He named it. He did not use the word apology. Not an apology, but something. Yeah, I said. I know. 6 weeks after that, my mother sent me a message. Not a call. A written message, which meant she had composed it and recomposed it. It was 41 words. I counted them. It said, I know I handled things in a way that hurt you. I am not good at saying this kind of thing out loud. I want to figure out how to be different. That is all I know how to say right now. 41 words. No justifications. No context. No follow-up paragraph walking it back. Just the 41 words and then nothing. I set the phone down, poured a cup of coffee, stood at the window for a few minutes. The street was quiet. Someone's dog was being walked in the direction of the park. I watched it until it was out of view. Then I picked up the phone and typed, I hear you. I'm not ready for a full conversation yet, but I'm not closing the door. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, can we just get coffee? Just us. Nobody else. The part of me that had been trained since childhood to smooth things over and restore comfort wanted to say yes, immediately, without condition, because yes with no conditions was the language I had been taught was how love worked. I noticed that part. I named it. I let it be there without acting on it. I typed back, yes, but I need 2 things. First, we don't talk about the case or my firm. Second, if I say I need to stop a conversation, we stop it. No convincing me to keep going. Her response came back in 30 seconds. One word. Okay. I looked at that word for a long time. It was not the apology. It was not the reckoning. But it was something I had not been given in 31 years. A limit received without an argument. A boundary accepted on the first pass. A door cracked open just enough to let a little light through. And for now, that was enough to walk toward. The verdict in Harkin Voss versus Consolidated Freight Solutions came down on a Wednesday in late October. Almost exactly 1 year after the night I had sat in a car on Willow Street in the flickering streetlight. It was a favorable outcome for our client. Patricia Amedro called me from the courthouse steps. She said, "We did that." 2 words. The simplest possible construction. I said we did, and she laughed and said she had a call with the managing partner in an hour and I should expect to hear from someone by end of day. I hung up the call and sat in my office chair for exactly 1 full minute. I did not check my phone. I did not open a document. I just sat and breathed and let the work be what it was. The relationships were different now. Different, not worse different. My mother still slipped into old patterns sometimes. She would make a comment about my schedule or suggest an occasion as if it were a foregone conclusion. When that happened, I would say, "Mom, we talked about this," and she would stop. Not gracefully. There was always a brief flicker, the old frustration assembling itself and then dissolving. But she stopped. Every time she stopped. That was not the relationship we had before. It was something being built under different conditions. My father had become quieter, not cold. Quieter. The silence that he used to deploy as a weather system was now something different. Something closer to listening. For a man who had filled rooms with the weight of his provision and his disappointment, that quietness represented a significant adjustment in how he occupied space. I did not call it change. I called it opening. It might have been more. Ernest had not apologized. I did not expect him to. I did not think it was coming. But something had shifted in the specific way he spoke about me in family contexts. He no longer framed my professional commitments as priorities placed over family. He had stopped using the word priorities as an indictment. What I was witnessing in Ernest was not genuine change. It was logistical adjustment. He had recalculated the cost of the campaign and had found it higher than anticipated. Not redemption. It was logistics. But at least he had stopped expecting someone else to carry the load. Patricia Webb, Ernest's wife, had followed through on what she had said quietly at the table. She had been the one to research the professional care coordination services for Auntie Celia. She had presented 3 options with pricing to the family. She had organized the cost distribution. She had done it without being asked. She had done it because she had said, "I told them they should have asked," and then she had backed it up. Josephine called every Monday, sometimes for 4 minutes, sometimes for 12. Never with an agenda, never with a need, just warm and consistent in the way that people are warm and consistent when they have decided that presence is its own language. That was their whole thing now. I had not won against my family. That is not what happened in that room, and it is not what happened in the year that followed. I had refused to lose myself. Those are not the same thing. And the difference is the whole point. It was a Thursday morning in late October, not a specific anniversary. Just a morning with the particular quality of late autumn in Chicago, when the air is cold enough that you can see your breath, but the light is still warm and gold on the west-facing windows. And the leaves have mostly turned, but not all of them have fallen, and everything is in the specific state of being mid-transition. Almost, but not yet. My kitchen table had the laptop open. On the left side of the screen was the file for Meridian's next significant matter, a commercial arbitration I had just been assigned as lead. On the right side was a prep book for the Illinois real estate bar sections I had been quietly reviewing, because the senior associate track had widened a lane I had not considered before. A cup of coffee was at my right elbow, poured at 7, which I had forgotten to drink because I had started reading immediately. I always pour the coffee and forget to drink it. I have been doing this since law school. It is my most consistent habit. My phone lit up. First, Josephine. "How you doing today, love?" 3 words and a comma. I typed back, like a person who knows where she's going. She sent a single thumbs up. That was their whole thing. Short and warm and no ceremony required. Then a name I had not seen on my screen in 11 weeks. Jerome. His message was brief. I've been thinking about what you said that day. About asking. I think I've been waiting to ask for things too. Not sure why I'm telling you this. Just wanted to. I read it 3 times. 2 possible interpretations. Jerome is beginning to understand his own pattern. Or, Jerome is reaching out because the family has shifted enough that it has created a kind of permission he did not have before. Both might be true. Both were worth sitting with. I typed back. I'm glad you told me. And yes, ask. The worst answer is no, and no is survivable. I sent it. Then I set the phone down. I was strong enough now to walk into whatever this was on my own terms. To say yes and mean it, or to say no and mean that too. The response I had sent was neither warm nor cold. It left the door open without assuming what was on the other side. I closed the message, took a sip of the cold coffee, which I had discovered I actually preferred cold if I forgot long enough. I opened the arbitration file, found my place in the document, got back to work. Somewhere down the block, a child was laughing at something in the particular high, bright way that children laugh when something is genuinely funny to them, before the world has taught them to modulate it. The sound came through the window and stayed for a moment, and then was gone. I poured a fresh cup, found my place, got back to building my life on my terms. It was a Thursday morning in late October. Not a specific anniversary, just a morning with the particular quality of late autumn in Chicago, when the air is cold enough that you can see your breath, but the light is still warm and gold on the west-facing windows. And the leaves have mostly turned, but not all of them have fallen, and everything is in the specific state of being mid-transition. Almost, but not yet. My kitchen table had the laptop open. On the left side of the screen was the file for Meridian's next significant matter, a commercial arbitration I had just been assigned as lead. On the right side was a prep book for the Illinois real estate bar sections I had been quietly reviewing, because the senior associate track had widened a lane I had not considered before. A cup of coffee was at my right elbow, poured at 7, which I had forgotten to drink because I had started reading immediately. I always pour the coffee and forget to drink it. I have been doing this since law school. It is my most consistent habit. My phone lit up. First, Josephine. How you doing today, love? 3 words and a comma. I typed back, like a person who knows where she's going. She sent a single thumbs up. That was their whole thing. Short and warm and no ceremony required. Then a name I had not seen on my screen in 11 weeks. Jerome. His message was brief. I've been thinking about what you said that day. About asking. I think I've been waiting to ask for things too. Not sure why I'm telling you this. Just wanted to. I read it 3 times. 2 possible interpretations. Jerome is beginning to understand his own pattern. Or, Jerome is reaching out because the family has shifted enough that it has created a kind of permission he did not have before. Both might be true. Both were worth sitting with. I typed back. I'm glad you told me. And yes, ask. The worst answer is no, and no is survivable. I sent it. Then I set the phone down. I was strong enough now to walk into whatever this was on my own terms. To say yes and mean it, or to say no and mean that too. The response I had sent was neither warm nor cold. It left the door open without assuming what was on the other side. I closed the message, took a sip of the cold coffee, which I had discovered I actually preferred cold if I forgot long enough. I opened the arbitration file, found my place in the document, got back to work. Somewhere down the block, a child was laughing at something in the particular high, bright way that children laugh when something is genuinely funny to them, before the world has taught them to modulate it. The sound came through the window and stayed for a moment, and then was gone. I poured a fresh cup, found my place, got back to building my life on my terms. If this story landed somewhere real for you, share it. Not with everyone. With the specific person in your life who has been sitting quietly in a room where someone else was deciding things. They might need to hear that someone else stood up. Subscribe if you haven't. More stories like this one. Thank you for listening to